Sean Diddy Combs has just filed a brand new bid to get out of jail before his sentencing in a few months. From arguing he shouldn't be locked up for his swinger lifestyle, to highlighting the atrocious conditions at the MDC, to addressing allegations of violence, he is fighting for his life in this new letter to the judge.
This is an emergency report. We are getting chaotic. Frantic information from inside the federal prison system tonight that signals an absolute catastrophe. Sean Diddy Combs.
Will Sean Diddy Combs be released from jail? I know I've asked that question before so many different times here on Sidebar, but we have right now a brand new request from his legal team, a brand new filing from his defense team arguing for why he should be released now after that monumental verdict in his criminal case several weeks ago. The circumstances have changed, and I will tell you what. We did an interview a few weeks back that kind of previewed why and how Combs could be released. It was a bail bondsman that is apparently working with Diddy's team behind the scenes. I'm going to get to that a little bit later, but what I want to talk about right now is this latest letter from the defense to the judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian. Remember, this comes after a jury of Combs' peers found him not guilty of racketeering conspiracy, not guilty of 2 counts of sex trafficking, but they did convict him of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution. He's set to be sentenced on October 3rd. Technically, he could face up to 10 years in prison on each charge. Highly unlikely. Think maybe you might be looking at somewhere to 2 to 5 years potentially, but he could also get time served and be released, although that also seems unlikely. I'll talk about that a little bit later too. But initially, after the verdict, right after the verdict, his defense team petitioned the court that he should be released. He was just acquitted of some very serious charges. The judge denied it. The judge denied Combs bail once again. And remember, this comes after he was rejected bail multiple times since he was arrested back in September of 2024, highlighting the severity of the charges, the violence, and so forth. But now, this is different. Now, what is the defense arguing? I'm going to go over all this in the new letter. I'm going to give my take at the end about whether or not it's going to be successful and whether or not he will actually be released before sentencing in October. So, the defense begins by arguing that Sean Combs should be released in advance of sentencing, and the court has the power to do this. They have the authority, among other things, because you can clearly show, quote, that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. So, what are those exceptions? What are those reasons? What are those circumstances that are exceptional? They highlight several things that we're going to get into. That the charges he was convicted of, we're going to call them the Mann Act violations. That's what it's called under the law. They're not as severe, they're not as egregious as other convictions in other cases. That the sheer fact that he's locked up at the MDC, the Metropolitan Detention Center, for the past 11 months, that in and of itself is a reason for him to be released. These are all exceptional circumstances, and I'm going to get into all the arguments. But first, they highlight the standard, and they argue that to be released under federal law, you need to show 2 conditions. First, the district court must find by clear and convincing evidence that the person is not likely to flee or pose a danger to the safety of any other person or the community if released. Second, it must be clearly shown that there are exceptional reasons why such person's detention would not be appropriate. Now, clear and convincing evidence is a lower standard, by the way. It's not like beyond a reasonable doubt. Anyway, basically, you have to show he's not a flight risk, he's not a danger, and you have to show there are particular, exceptional, unique reasons for why detaining Combs is wrong. We're going to start with the exceptional reasons justifying his release. And they begin by trying to define, well, what exactly is exceptional circumstances? What does that mean? And they argue that case law suggests a court has a lot of discretion to determine whether a particular set of circumstances qualifies as exceptions. And they say, look, Sean Combs, his case, so different from other ones. There has never been, according to them, a Mann Act prosecution like this one before. And this is how they lay it out. Quote, there has literally never been a case like this one, where a person and his girlfriend arrange for adult men to have consensual sexual relations with the adult long-term girlfriend as part of a demonstrated swingers lifestyle and has been prosecuted and incarcerated.
The incarcerated music mogul has been the victim of a coordinated, savage attack. The reports we are receiving paint a horrific picture. Diddy was viciously ambushed behind bars and has been left in critical condition, barely holding on. The fallout has reportedly thrown the entire facility into chaos, and officials are now scrambling as they fear the worst, his worst nightmare, the one his lawyers warned the court about. has come true in the most brutal fashion imaginable. The carefully constructed illusion of safety, the transfer to the supposedly safer low-security facility at Fort Dix, has been exposed as a catastrophic failure. That move was a desperate attempt to protect him, but a target this big, with a reputation this notorious, cannot hide. Sources from inside the prison network allege this was not a random fight. This was a calculated ambush. A group of inmates reportedly waited for a moment of vulnerability, a gap in security, and struck with absolute ferocity. This was not the previous knife threat, which was a warning. This was an attempt at a final, bloody punctuation mark. The aftermath of the assault is the cause of the current pandemonium.
This was a lifestyle, one that both Miss Ventura and Jane chose, one they all, as grown adults, had a right to choose. Like many aspects of sex and intimacy, it was not without its complications, its bouts of jealousy, and at times, its frustrations. But that is a hallmark of any serious romantic relationship, and that is what these were: serious, long-term romantic relationships. By the way, not surprising they're really focusing on this because, again, he was acquitted of sex trafficking. They highlight how the jury didn't find sex trafficking of Jane or Cassie, that it didn't occur. There was no force, fraud, or coercion that was used to induce these women to engage in commercial sex acts. For transportation to engage in prostitution, what he was convicted of, the prosecution didn't have to prove that violence was used or that fraud was used or threats were used. It was just, did you transport these women and men for the purposes of sex work, commercial sex acts? And obviously the jury convicted him of that. And they highlight all the jury found was that there was prostitution, payment of porn stars and escorts. And they highlight that he is a swinger, or under the Mann Act, a John. And they argue he doesn't deserve to be locked up for this. Quote, Sean Combs should not be in jail for this conduct. In fact, he may be the only person currently in a United States jail for being any sort of John, and certainly the only person in jail for hiring adult male escorts for him and his girlfriend when he did not even have sex with the escort himself. Over the last 75 years, the White Slave Traffic Act has been limited to defendants who cause interstate travel for financial gain through the business of prostitution. That Sean Combs remains in jail for being convicted of being a customer of consensual adult sex services makes this case truly exceptional. Not only is prosecuting the users of adult prostitution services inconsistent with the Mann Act, it's inconsistent with the prosecution policies of the district attorneys of Manhattan and the city attorney of Los Angeles, California, two of the three locations where this prostitution allegedly took place. In addition, Mr. Combs is incarcerated while everyone else involved in this identical conduct, his girlfriends, the cowboys, the agency leaders, the porn stars, and others, walk free, as they should. If there was ever a fact pattern that was exceptional under the Mann Act, it is this one. And then they move on to another argument, that the Department of Justice, the DOJ, has usually only charged Mann Act violations when there's financial gain. And they even cite a number of cases in the Southern District of New York, where Combs was prosecuted, that apparently involved defendants that set up a prostitution business for profit. Again, trying to distinguish between Combs' conduct and these cases. He never did any of this for profit, they argued. And they even cite the 1953 U.S. Attorney's Manual that says, quote, as a general rule, prosecution should not be instituted in the so-called non-commercial cases. And they claim the Department of Justice manual today, quote, makes clear that the prosecution of customers involved in an 18 U.S.C. 2421 offense, like Mr. Combs here, is now limited to prosecuting those who engage in commercial sex with victims of sex trafficking, in addition to those who otherwise perpetrate or facilitate human trafficking offenses. And in the absence of any sex trafficking charge, however, it is clear that the standalone Mann Act counts never would have been prosecuted. That seems true. I think you ask any legal expert, they will say if all the government had against Sean Combs was the transportation to engage in prostitution charges, just the prostitution charges.
Diddy was reportedly discovered by correctional staff in a state of critical medical distress. Having suffered severe trauma, the man who once commanded the music world, who defined luxury and power, was found broken and unresponsive. The immediate assessment was dire, triggering a code blue emergency response. We are hearing that he is clinging to life, and the prison's medical staff are in a desperate battle to stabilize him. The panic is palpable. Officials are terrified that he may not survive the night. But the physical trauma is only one part of this horrific equation. The reports we are getting paint a picture of a man who has been psychologically annihilated. The man who was once the ultimate predator is now the ultimate prey. The attack has reportedly shattered his psyche, and sources describe a scene of him losing it completely, a total mental and emotional collapse. The terror of his reality has finally set in. He is trapped, he is vulnerable, and he is hunted. The realization that his
probably wouldn't have gone after him. They coupled it with racketeering and they coupled it with sex trafficking. I agree with that. I don't think that they would have gone after him just for that. Anyway, the defense highlights how modern day prosecutions of Johns is really when you're talking about exploiting vulnerable foreigners who don't speak English well, which again is not the case here. And they highlight how the only potentially comparable case in New York is where you had a retired police officer and a former judge who apparently hired women to have sex with a male fraternal group called the Jesters. But Combs' attorneys say, while there was no profit there, there's no profit here, there was sex trafficking of those prostitutes. That's what's different. Again, Combs was acquitted of sex trafficking in this case. And here's the main point, quote, moreover, the cases which involve defendants similarly situated to Mr. Combs have been released on bond pending sentencing. In reviewing the cases across the country where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District in another case basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency suite that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges?
Wealth, his influence, and his high-powered legal team are utterly useless inside those walls has reportedly triggered a profound psychological break. The man who once controlled everything, who wrote checks to make problems disappear, is now face to face with a reality he cannot buy his way out of. He is described as terrified, paranoid, and in a state of shock so severe that it is complicating the emergency medical efforts. This attack has sent a shockwave through the entire Bureau of Prisons, triggering what is being described as total chaos. The facility is in an immediate, full-scale lockdown. Every cell is being tossed. Every inmate is being questioned. The administration is in full-blown panic mode, facing the horrifying prospect of the world's most high-profile inmate dying on their watch. The political and legal fallout of such a catastrophic failure would be nuclear. How does this happen? How do they allow their most visible asset, a man whose defense team repeatedly warned the court he was a target, to be ambushed and beaten to the brink of death? The recriminations are already flying, and the institution is in chaos trying to
try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why? Judge Subramanian had said after the verdict that the reason he was denying bail was because of Combs' violence, that his own attorneys admitted he was violent during the course of the trial. Well, here is what Combs' defense attorneys argue about that. Quote, the court noted that the defense admitted a history of domestic violence as to Miss Ventura and that he struck Jane twice in June 2024. However, we strenuously object that Mr. Combs poses a danger to the community, aside from a single instance on June 18, 2024, where Mr. Combs was provoked by Jane through her own acts of violence. There was no evidence of any acts of violence in the last 7 years. Indeed, the jury notably rejected the government's argument that the June 2024 incident constituted coercion when it acquitted Mr. Combs of the sex trafficking charge. Also, prior to his arrest in this case, Mr. Combs enrolled in a domestic violence program in which he participated until he was arrested and incarcerated in connection with this case. If released on conditions, Sean Combs will not be violent to anyone. As we said in court, this jury gave him his life back, and he will not squander his second chance at life, nor would he do anything to further jeopardize his 7 children not having a father and 4 of his children not having a parent at all. The court can fashion any set of conditions, and Mr. Combs will abide by any condition to make the court comfortable that Mr. Combs will not be violent toward any person. And that is when they propose the following bail package. That Combs will sign a $50 million bond secured by his home in Miami, that the bond will be co-signed by 3 financially responsible people, that Combs will reside in his home in Miami, that his travel will be limited to the Southern District of Florida, the Southern District of New York for attorney meetings, as well as airports that are necessary to travel between the two, that he will be placed under the express supervision of the U.S. Pretrial Services Agency, that he will report to that agency as directed, that his passport will be surrendered to pretrial services, that he shall not apply for any other passport, and they even highlight that the court can add other conditions too. Home detention, private security approved by the court, mental health treatment. He'll agree to it all. Now, let me tell you, we kind of previewed that this all would happen, this argument would happen, this new bail package would be presented when we spoke a few weeks ago to renowned bail bondsman, to the celebrities, by the way, to the stars, Ira Judelson, who apparently had been working with Combs' team behind the scenes on working to secure his release. Here's what he said about a new package after the verdict.
When Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well,
contain the situation and control the narrative from leaking. The aftermath of this savage attack is the immediate cause of the current pandemonium. Combs was reportedly discovered by correctional staff in a state of catastrophic medical distress, having sustained severe, life-threatening injuries. The man who once dictated the trends of the global music industry, who defined obscene luxury and financial power, was found broken, unresponsive, and covered in his own blood. The initial medical assessment was dire, immediately escalating to a code blue emergency response. We are hearing that he is currently clinging to survival, and the inadequate prison medical unit is engaged in a desperate, frantic race against time to stabilize his condition. The administrative panic is absolute. Officials are bracing themselves for the horrifying possibility that the most famous inmate in the world may not make it through the night. But the physical degradation is only one element of this multi-layered catastrophe. The internal reports describe a man who has been utterly destroyed.
News came out after the trial was the firing of Maureen Comey, the lead prosecutor in this case. Now, there's obviously a political angle to it. There are comments that she has made, but I have to ask, you going head to head against her for so many weeks, months and before that, the firing of her, what did you make of that?
I think it was unfortunate. She's a very well-respected prosecutor. We had good sort of professional relationships with her during the course of the trial. And, I don't really think it had anything to do with the trial, but I can't really say anything beyond that. It just,
sure.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fair enough. Let's talk about something we can get into quite a bit. Let's talk bail. Okay, so we did a previous sidebar breaking down the defense's renewed motion for release, several arguments for why Sean Combs, should be released on bail pending sentencing, acquitted of the most serious charges. There's no comparable case of someone who is convicted of the Mann Act alone and not engaging in sex trafficking or a prostitution for financial gain, and they would be locked up like this. Talked about the issues plaguing the MDC, how it is dangerous, how he's not a risk of flight, not a danger to the community. But do you think Judge Arun Subramanian is going to be persuaded by your letter, by your motion? Because obviously he specifically highlighted after the verdict your client's violence, how the defense asserted at trial that Combs was violent. Do you think he's going to have a change of opinion now based upon the legal papers?
Well, I think we certainly hope so. And, as we pointed out in the papers, the unfortunate violence that occurred was mostly a really long time ago, other than the one incident in June that Jane testified to, which was kind of unusual. They had been together for 3 years. There had been no violence, and she essentially started the fight. I'm not excusing anything, but it was kind of a one-off. And I think the government really hadn't put in any evidence of any recent violence. The Intercontinental video, remember, that was almost 10 years ago. He broke up with Cassie in 2018. And in our reply papers yesterday, we submitted a letter from Gina Hyun, who was one of the alleged victims, a different ex-girlfriend. And I think it was a pretty powerful letter about how Sean has changed, how she's not concerned about violence. She thinks he should be released on bail. So we're hoping that that will persuade the judge, given everything else, particularly, as you noted, like the really, really unusual nature of this particular Mann Act conviction and the fact that he's already been in prison, or jail rather, for like 11 months. This case is a one-off to begin with, but we're not aware of any case like this with a Mann Act conviction where anyone's done that much time to begin with. So.
And prosecutors, I'm imagining, have come back or will come back and say, well, listen, look, after the raids on his property, he engaged, or what they will say, he allegedly engaged in criminal activity and, obviously violence, they say, with Jane. But they say, look, what was in his hotel room when he was picked up in New York. They made allegations of what he was trying to do while he was in the MDC, whether it was using other inmates' phone privileges to have three-way phone calls. That was litigated before trial. What would be your response to say, you make the point that he is a change?
Psychologically, the legendary figure who once walked through life like a god is now the absolute epitome of terrified vulnerability. The attack has reportedly shattered his entire sense of reality, with multiple sources describing a scene where he totally lost control of himself, a complete, visceral mental and emotional collapse. The terrifying, inescapable reality of his confinement has finally broken him. He is trapped, he is exposed, and he is relentlessly hunted. The realization that his vast fortune, his legal maneuvering, and his cultural influence are all totally worthless inside those concrete walls has reportedly triggered a profound, irreversible psychological break. He is described as a shell of his former self, consumed by terror and paranoia, a mental state so fragile it is actively complicating the emergency medical efforts to save him. This incident has sent a catastrophic shockwave through the entire Federal Bureau of Prisons, triggering what sources describe as system-wide chaos. The facility is instantly plunged into a total, full-scale, emergency lockdown. Every cell is being violently searched. Every
person, the violence that was shown during the course of this trial is from years ago, but how would you convince the judge to say, listen, we are being truthful, we are being honest, we are being forefront, that he really is a different human being? Because the judge, again, this was right after the verdict and didn't have an opportunity for a briefing schedule. How can you make the argument that he is different and that he should be trusted?
Well, I mean, I think, the point you mentioned about the arrest, I mean, unfortunately, Sean has struggled with drug addiction for a long time. And I think one of the good things and positive things is that has come out of his incarceration. It's given him an opportunity, to rehabilitate. He's committed to continuing that. He's committed to a long-term program of therapy and helping with the domestic violence problem that he's had in the past. So, at a certain point, you have to just, maybe it is a leap of faith, but you have to just give a person another chance. And he really is committed to change and to there being a new chapter of service on his part. So, I think we have to hope that the judge will agree with that. And I think we've made a strong case for that.
Do you know when the judge might make a decision on bail?
We don't know.
Okay. If he denies release again, does that give you a sense of what sentencing could be like? Now, to be clear, my understanding is Judge Arun Subramanian even said at the point, if I make a decision on release, it's not indicative of where I'm leaning towards sentencing. I know there's a pre-sentencing investigation still being conducted or has been conducted. There's a lot of factors to consider. But I have to ask about whether this is going to, have an effect on sentencing. Do you believe it's going to have an effect on sentencing? Does it give you a preview of where the judge is lining up? Because my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong, you are probably going to be arguing for time served, maybe a minimum of 21 to 27 months. Where do you think the judge is going to go here?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you have to take each step at a time and that the judge is not going to prejudge that. There's a lot more information he needs to get, not only the pre-sentence report, but we're going to make a very fulsome sentencing submission. And he's going to have, a much more detailed picture. Even, the trial was about the charges, right? And he doesn't have the full picture of all the factors about Sean's life that he's going to consider. There's going to be a big fight about the sentencing guidelines. We think actually we're going to end up arguing for an even lower guideline range than we had originally believed at the time of the verdict, where we didn't have we had like a couple of hours to try to figure out what to say about bail. So, I hope the judge will grant bail, but I feel confident that even if he doesn't, it doesn't necessarily mean he's not going to sentence Sean to time served. He's going to take everything into account when he gets all the submissions. And, I've got a lot of confidence that the judge is going to be fair and not prejudge the situation.
And you also have this motion for judgment of acquittal, that the Mann Act convictions should be tossed out, Combs be granted at a minimum a new trial. Number of very interesting arguments that are present, and it's basically that there has really never been, as we talked about, a prosecution conviction on a Mann Act like this, that Combs wasn't profiting off of the business. There were all consenting adults that were involved. The jury didn't find that there was any sex trafficking, that this isn't even prostitution per se, it's more voyeurism, that the intent wasn't for people to travel for sex for money, but paid them for their time. They were all having a good time. There's a First Amendment argument that the freak-offs and the hotel nights were performances that were videotaped so he could watch them later.
The inmate is being interrogated. The institutional administration is in full-blown crisis mode, facing the unthinkable prospect of their most high-profile inmate dying under their custody. The resultant political firestorm and legal fallout of such a colossal security failure would be devastating and unforgivable. How could this have happened? How could the system allow their most visible and sensitive prisoner, a man whose defense team warned the courts he was a target, to be so brutally and critically ambushed? The finger-pointing and internal recriminations are already raging, as the facility struggles desperately to contain the situation and prevent the truth from fully escaping the perimeter. This is the ultimate, dark, inescapable irony. Diddy's entire life was predicated on an elaborate, expensive facade of total invincibility, of being the one true master who controlled every situation. Now, he is utterly powerless, a broken pawn in a lethal, unforgiving game he was never prepared to play. His business empire has utterly dissolved. His immense fortune has been drained by legal fees and asset seizures. And now, his physical well-being and his sanity have been violently stripped away. The man who truly had everything is now reduced to a broken body, a name on a critical list, and a symbol of absolute, terrifying, final vulnerability. We are monitoring this horrific situation minute by minute, awaiting any official word on his condition. But the intelligence from inside the perimeter suggests the situation is as grim as it could possibly be. The former king is truly, brutally defeated, and it is entirely possible he will never rise again. This is the ultimate, dark irony. Diddy's entire life was built on an image of invincibility, of being the man who pulled the strings. Now, he is the one being controlled, a pawn in a brutal game he cannot win. The empire has crumbled. The money has vanished under the weight of legal fees and seizures. And now, his physical safety is gone. He has lost his health, his sanity, and he is moments away from losing his life. The man who had everything is now reduced to a body on a gurney, a name on a critical list, a symbol of absolute, terrifying vulnerability. We are monitoring this situation as it develops, awaiting any official word on his condition. But the reports from inside are as grim as they come. The king has truly fallen, and he may never get up.